So once more into the breach. uh, yeah, you've probably looked at some of these slides and stuff and noticed I have, a little wordplay and jokes built into it. But once I start executing into the unknown, what do I have to deal with? And one problem people run into is the problem seems too big. And you look at it and you say, how the heck am I going to deal with that? And so when the challenge seems too big, the answer is take the top three things in front of you. Forget about the entire humongous thing. Put your head down and focus one at a time. This is where you start to build momentum. One of the great athletic stories was Al Arbor of the New York Islanders was one of my favorite all-time coaches. His team was down 3-0 in the playoffs. And so first team to win 4 and you're out. And so it's like, geez, how do you beat that? And Al Arbor just told his team, everybody stop thinking. Okay, this is all we're going to do. I want you to go out and skate a good shift. And so that's what the players focus on. Let's go skate a good shift. And they said, okay, let's go skate another good shift. And so they skated another good shift. And then he said, let's concentrate on getting a goal. They got a goal. Let's go get another goal. Next thing you know, they won a game. He used the exact same formula, game by game by game. By not looking at the enormity of it and just focusing on getting things done, that's the way he dealt with it. One of the great stories about this kind of attitude was Admiral Stockdale. Admiral Stockdale spent 7 years in the Hanoi Hilton, and he was constantly tortured. Admiral Stockdale is one of the great stories of history. The North Vietnamese, since he was the highest ranking officer in Vietnam, wanted to use him for propaganda purposes. So what he did is he cut himself across the forehead so he would be bleeding. So they bandaged him up and to prevent him from hurting himself again. And then he literally took a stool and beat himself in the face senseless, so he was unrecognizable. Well, once he healed from that, then they basically tied up his hands so he couldn't do anything. And they put him in this film, and what he started to do is he blinked with his eyes in Morse code, torture. This is what a great man he was. And so Admiral Stockdale posed a simple question. In the face of overwhelming odds, how does one maintain hope in the face of adversity? For these poor soldiers, how are they going to, survive this? And Admiral Stockdale said the people who died were actually the optimists, and because they would think, hey, I'm going to be home by Christmas. And guess what? Christmas would roll around, and they wouldn't be home, and then Easter would roll around, and then Christmas would roll around again, and they would just give up hope. And so what he told his men is what he did is he set up achievable goals. He would tell them, okay, hold out against torture for this long. And if you can hold out this long, it's okay to tell them this. And so instead of focusing on the whole larger picture, it was about how to survive day by day of what they had to deal with. And they came to grips with reality. And so those poor optimists just didn't make it. Another challenge for you, breaching the unknown, is that there are times you feel like you're drowning. It's not too big. You just have too much to do, and you get inundated. And so your instincts are to go in and dive in and fight. But the question is, are you tackling the symptoms or you're tackling the problems? Because when people dive in and they just mindlessly start doing things, and so this is a case of where you need to actually take a step back. You see this and you start plucking each and every one of those. But if you take a step back, you realize you're actually dealing with this. And this is where your architect's perspective comes in. Look at the larger picture. And so by focusing on the larger picture, you realize that you need to work smarter and not harder. It's always good to take this kind of sanity test, because then you realize, well, wait. Why are we working on this? What's the benefit? And so your tasks change. One thing, Slow Management Review recently published an article about this, and a lot of other people have published articles about this. But multitasking is basically bullshit. People who work on 8 things at once are not going to do 8 things well. You're better off just focusing on a few tasks and doing those well. And it's actually kind of funny because my roommate from MIT and all, we just joked that the best time management we ever learned was from MIT. And the other thing we both learned is it's better to just focus on a few things and do it well than a lot of things and do it poorly. You hit a gray zone, and this happens in every PhD. And you watch the PhDs who just keep spinning their wheels in the woods. They hit year 6 in their doctorates programs, and then they get the get out of my life degree. Just write up what you have and get out of here. But I refer to this as the gray zone. And that's that when you get lost, you've got analysis paralysis. Even if you do get more data, you're sure know what to do. You start and these are the flip a coin events. It's like, I don't know which way to go. And they said, call heads or tails, and your true intent comes out, but that doesn't work. You're going to still change your mind. And so here's a framework that's always worked for me. When you're in these coin flip situations, ask yourself one question. Where do I want to make my mistakes, and what can I live with? If I'm putting in golf, if I miss, can I live better with putting long or putting short? What can you live with better? Listening to your boss or not listening to your boss? If you are not going to make a market, do you feel better that you bought a bad product out early and that's the way you feel? Or are you going to feel worse that somebody jumped the market ahead of you? And so why this is such an effective technique is that it gives you a different perspective of looking at problems. And your intuition comes out. And more times than not, you are going to be right. But what it comes down to is that you're able to live with your problems and you don't create baggage for yourself by constantly living with it. Uncertainty brings about fear. And trust me, I've seen a lot of it. And I've seen it from executives. I've seen it from Stanford graduates. It doesn't matter who you are. Fear is a human thing. And people do a lot of silly things due to fear, like invade Iraq. The problem is that when you have these fears, you are prey. You're vulnerable to every little emotion and everything else. The way to get around it is to remember one thing. Fear is not based on reality. Fear is something that might happen. Fear is not something that will happen. You're wasting your time due to dealing with something that's not real. And not only that, but fear robs you of life. The time you spend on fear is time that you are not living. When you live in fear, you are living in insanity, things that aren't real. Dr. Cho learned a very hard lesson about this, and that's my wife has lupus. And in the early days, it was very, very bad for her. And I can pretty much see that she probably wasn't going to make it another 5 years. Fortunately for us, a new miracle drug came out, and that's helped a lot of her problems. But I used to live in fear. I used to live in sadness. And then one day I realized, something? Every minute I spend being scared is a minute that takes me away from enjoying whatever time I have with her. Fear is robbing me of life. I've got to let it go. What about stress? And so one way of dealing with stress is something, and I've talked to a lot of different psychologists and all about, how do people deal with stress? Because it's something that I see a lot of in experimentation. And there's something called the Alexander technique. And what the Alexander technique talks about is that we internalize stress. And by internalizing that stress, we build up all this negative energy and strain with this. And it causes bad physical damage to us. The other thing about stress is that you're more vulnerable to irrational and negative thoughts. And so if you're feeling bad and crappy, you lost at something, somebody's doing well and you're not, you got dumped, you're jealous, your first response is to fight it. I'm fine, there's nothing wrong, I'm okay, I can deal with it, because you don't want to show, vulnerability. The problem is when you do these things, you're basically fighting with yourself and you're making it worse. You're causing yourself more damage. The way to deal with these things is exactly the opposite. Flow with it. Give in. Feel it. Don't fight it. Kick the door. Throw things. Rage. But don't hurt anybody. Go ahead and let yourself feel crappy. Go ahead and be pathetic. But then get it out of your system. Let it go. You can let it go on for a while, but if it prolongs, then basically you need to go get professional help. But by letting it go, you turn your back on it. It's over. You've let yourself feel it. And so, what's an example of letting it go? In that a baggage event is like, for example, for students, you did badly on an exam. And so what I tell students is, think about it in this way. If I had another week, could I have done better? And so my options in letting things go is you accept it. You did the best you could. And that week wouldn't have made any difference. You can reject it. I could study. If I studied more, that week would have made a difference. So it wasn't my best shot. And the lesson is, I'm just not working hard enough. Or you could live with it, and that's it. It was the best I could do now, but in the future, I'm going to do much better. And so let it out of your system. One way to reduce stress is through breathing. And there's lots of, and some of you who are ex-military, you've probably learned a bunch of techniques about breathing. And when you breathe through your nose and then out your mouth. And the reason why that's a more effective technique is when you breathe through your mouth, you're using your lungs to draw wind in. And so your lungs are a very big organ, so you're just tiring yourself out. When you breathe through your nose, you're using your diaphragm. Basically, you're just bringing in enough air to fill your lungs, but not to overexpand your lungs. And then exhale through your mouth. This is actually what martial artists learn. Fresh oxygen rejuvenates the cells, and not only that, but when you breathe like that, it creates new focus. It clears the other things away. And what's a good example of where they use this technique? Labor. This is why they teach women breathing techniques. More than anything else, it gives a woman something to focus on, so she's not focusing on pain. Another way to reduce stress out of your body is stand up and stand up straight and let your muscles relax. If you look at winners and losers, look at what the losers are doing. They're all leaning forward. They're all off balance. And the winner is the person who is always upright and out. And that's the structure you need to have. Before I went to MIT, I had outstanding stature. You could put 10 books on my head and they wouldn't fall over. And then MIT kind of wrecked me. And a good example of people who have good posture are children. Look at children. They don't have bad posture. And the reason why is they don't have luggage. When you looked at really stressed people, what do? They're hunched over, they move forward. They're literally being dragged to their death. And so, learn to release that energy out of you. Here's an example of dealing with stress. In 2008, young Barack Obama, a man who's ready to take on the world and hope and change and all that. And then by the end, 8 years later, that's a lot of stress. Now, in 2005, this is Dr. Cho with his lovely bride. And this is a picture of Dr. Cho in 2015. I pretty much look the same. Why? Because contrary to the president, I know how to deal with stress. All right, his job was a little more stressful than mine was, but you get the point. And the final part of the groove is whenever you do something, ask yourself one question. Does it make sense? Because good results can be bad results can be good ones. Just ask yourself, does this make sense? For example, Motorola. Success can fool you into thinking you're okay. They were the #1 cell phone selling company in the world, and guess what? They never saw the smartphone coming, and they got actually I should say the digital phone coming, and they got squashed. On the other hand, bad results can be a good one. There's all kinds of stories of people who get fired from jobs, they get pissed off, they start businesses, and they become successful. Good luck can be bad luck can be good luck. But anytime you come to the end of something, I do this constantly, I take a step back and ask myself, does this make sense? You can have really weird things come out. Don't dismiss them out of hand. Look at the circumstances around it. Strange things actually can make sense. And so the last thing I'll leave you with is a friend of mine. So some of the kids of your friends become like your children. And so I had a surrogate daughter, and she said to me, you must be really smart with all those degrees and everything. I'm like, go talk to your Auntie Elle, who is my friend Elaine. And he asked her, so is Dr. Cho really smart? And she said to him, and she liked to call me Stephen, and she just said, Stephen is not smart, but what he does have is great guile. And what it comes down to is, it doesn't take a lot of smarts, but if you plan properly, if you look at things differently than other people, and you compete on your terms, that's the way you win. And you don't have to be a genius to do that. Anybody can do it. And that's why I came up with this whole system of the groove.